Chapter 858. Generous on the tiny balcony of the master bedroom, Klein stood behind a railing in the form of Dwayne Dante's. He silently watched Baron Sindras's luxurious carriage depart. His mind was still resonating with the conversation he just had. He believed that there had been a secret plot behind the acquiring of the Coim Company's shares from the very beginning. According to Sindras, although the Coim Company has great potential and bright prospects, its current value is only limited to Backlund. It's constrained by many conditions, making it not worthy for a powerful banker to place such great importance on it that he had to take on a stance of being hell-bent on acquiring it. After all, even if he didn't succeed, it would only be a difference in monetary profit. It wouldn't result in any losses. For the seller, Quarren, it's very normal to be under external stress to sell his shares for cash. It's also very normal for him to be unwilling to see moneybags, Baron Sindras from the Conservative Party. But herein lies the problem. As a businessman, faced with a deal that isn't considered important, the political inclinations are something to be considered when prices are similar. There's no reason to reject the possibility of receiving an extremely high premium. Yet, he had deliberately rushed to close the deal with Dwayne Dante's before Sindras could make his final offer. It's as if he has a grudge with money or views the Conservative Party with extreme prejudice. And this doesn't match the current political climate. The Lone Kingdom's internal politics hasn't reached such a splintered state. From the looks of it, someone is forcing Sindras to do this, and someone had designed a trap, using Quarren's 3% shares as the bait and me as the cover to lure Sindras into the trap, wishing to achieve a certain goal. Klein looked at the street lamps under the night sky as he sighed poignantly. Based on my assumption, if I hadn't discovered the problem tonight and hadn't sent someone to Sindras, the subsequent developments would definitely have me crushed by all kinds of seemingly incriminating evidence. And when the military or the Church of Evernight intervenes, there will undoubtedly be a twist in the evidence, incriminating Sindras. During this process, just a tiny misjudgment on Sindras's part will result in him treating Dwayne Dante's as an accomplice of the mastermind behind this ploy. He would use a rather intense method in response, hammering the final nail in my coffin. As for who the mastermind was and their true goals, Klein had no idea. All he could do was confirm that Ma'am Mary likely wasn't aware of the truth. She was only used due to her anxiousness to preserve her control over the Coim Company. In short, she wasn't qualified to be deeply involved in the mastermind's ploy. Environment protection. New party. Conservative party. Bankers. Acquisition. Framing. One word after another surfaced in Klein's mind, seemingly allowing him to see through the present calm in Backlund. He saw the dangerous stirrings that were hidden beneath the surface. They existed for a long time and hadn't been quelled because of the Great Smog. It was even possible that it was just an extension of the tragedy. When all of these meshed together, mixed with the tense international environment, Klein suddenly thought of a word: revolution. In that second, Klein seemed to catch a whiff of the impending storm. Together with the prophecy of the apocalypse, I wonder how much chaos and madness are brewing in secret. Currently, my main goal is to start from the military and investigate the truth behind the Great Smog of Backlund. If I were to get caught up in this maelstrom, there's a high chance I'll get involved in unnecessary trouble. Perhaps it might expose my sequence powers, preventing me from continuing my act as Dwayne Dante's. Klein retracted his gaze, having made up his decision. It was to quickly extricate himself from the matter. As for Sindras's safety, he wasn't too worried. First, the former had the Conservative Party backing him, and he had his own faction. With him on alert, it would be difficult for him to suffer any further harm. Second, Klein didn't have any deep ties with him. Thus, providing a warning had already spoken volumes of his character. As for the truth behind Quarren's death, he had no right to carry out any investigations. All he could do was trust in the Nighthawk's rich experience and the myriad of means to have a chance of finding the real clues. How should I extricate myself? As long as the shares are with me, it implies that I'll ultimately remain center stage. Get Ma'am Mary to acquire it ahead of time? That will be very difficult. She likely doesn't have the funds. Sell it to Sindras? That will be in violation of the contract. Amidst Klein's flurry of thoughts, he gradually had an idea. His facial muscles twitched a little for some baffling reason before they relaxed. This was because what he wanted to do was something he had planned on doing but lacked the ability to do so. Furthermore, it would also benefit him by establishing an image, bettering his chances of entering high society. In the room adjacent to the balcony, Zio and Furs were observing the streets and garden. One of them was looking at the crimson moon that was half hidden behind the thick clouds. There was a prolonged silence. Only when Dwayne Dantes' lights were extinguished did Furs turn to look at her friend. She said in excitement and clear poignancy, "Being a tycoon sure isn't easy. If you were him, you might have gone bankrupt in 3 days and be sent to jail." Zio shot her a glance and said, "I can hire a powerful butler, a professional lawyer, and a capable business secretary to help me." Furs didn't continue putting her down as she said with a smile, "If I were you, I would change all of it to cash, bonds and property. I'll use the annual income they bring about to maintain a decent life." Just as she said that, she saw Zio frown slightly. She cast her gaze towards the first floor. What happened? Furs tensed up. Zio observed for a few seconds before saying, "My spiritual perception tells me that an item or matter related to black magic has appeared." One of the biggest advantages of a sheriff was that when they were close enough, they could sense matters related to evil, chaos, and madness that weren't screened. Black magic. Furs was considered a senior beyonder, so she wasn't unfamiliar with that. Strictly speaking, anything that didn't pass through the 7 orthodox deities was considered as black magic. It included ritualistic magic that prayed to secret existences. In the typical sense, black magic referred to the use of flesh and blood, hair, and all kinds of strange items to cast strange spells. It partially involved evil gods, one's beyonder powers, the spirituality of the materials used, and the correct symbols and magic labels. Zio nodded heavily and said, "Yes, it's on the first floor. I plan on taking a look. Stay here to protect Mr. Dantes." Furs kept silent for 2 seconds and nodded without wasting any time. "Okay." After Zio left the balcony's half-open room, Furs took out Lamino's travels from a hidden pouch, prepared to immediately take action if anything amiss happened. Elsewhere, Zio nimbly and briskly arrived at the first floor. Following her senses, she arrived outside a room. After confirming that the target was inside, Zio was surprised as her expression gradually darkened. If she didn't remember wrongly, this room likely belonged to butler Walter who had hired her. During her momentary daze, the black magic item or matter which triggered her spiritual perception vanished. Calm returned to the room as though nothing abnormal had happened. Zio hurriedly pressed her ear to the door and carefully listened, confirming that there was the breathing of a human inside. After waiting for a while and seeing that Walter wasn't doing anything else, she returned to the 3rd floor with a look of suspicion. She recounted her findings to her friend and finally said, "Do we feign ignorance, or think of a way to remind Mr. Dantes?" Furs thought and said, "Perhaps the butler doesn't have any ill intentions? Let's keep observing." After deciding on their stance, she scared in wonder. "I have to say that Mr. Dwayne Dantes is a really pitiful person. Not only was he used by others to harm Baron Syndras and get framed, nearly throwing him into jail and losing his reputation, but he also has a butler who researches black magic with an unknown motive. Sigh, I hope he doesn't lose his life because of that. On this front, he's only a helpless commoner." Zio nodded in agreement. "If we're unable to determine the butler's intentions after 3 days are over, we can leave a slip for him to warn him." The next morning, Klein glanced at Walter in a normal fashion after having breakfast before leaving home with Richardson. He rode a cathedral to St. Samuel Cathedral. After the preaching and prayers, Klein didn't make any donations. Instead, he directly came to Bishop Electra. "Is there something?" Although this bishop was under immense stress due to the infiltration of Cheney's Gate, he was still rather friendly when dealing with the faithful. Klein smiled and replied, "I've recently been involved in certain matters and have come to recognize my true self." Without waiting for Electra to inquire, he continued, "I wish to establish a foundation that targets the poor. I hope that they can receive help from the church. I will place the Coim Company shares I have on hand into this foundation, so as to kickstart this initiative using all the funds obtainable from the contract." Electra was nearly stupefied by what he heard because it was definitely a sizable sum. Although it wasn't public knowledge how much Dwayne Dantes spent on acquiring the 3% shares, just from the relevant sources of information, it was estimated to be over £10,000. Furthermore, the future returns were nothing to scoff at. And back then, Ma'am Mary had been pursued by many men of status who had wealth in the range of tens of thousands of pounds. Therefore, for Dwayne Dantes to suddenly donate more than £10,000 was definitely considered a generous move. In the whole of the Church of Evernight, apart from donations from a deceased's will, There were only a handful of one-time donations that exceeded this amount. This is an act that deserves all kinds of praise, Electra said from the bottom of his heart. However, I have the obligation to remind you that you shouldn't do something that exceeds your reach. Klein smiled and replied, "This isn't a small sum for me as well, but it's still acceptable. It wouldn't affect my life and business." Electra's smile gradually turned warm as he said with a nod, "The goddess will definitely watch you." Upon hearing this blessing, Klein's expression nearly froze. Electra continued, "I will report the matter to His Grace and try to organize a charity party for this foundation. When the time comes, I'll invite the goddess's faithful from different domains. They will include powerful aristocrats and their families. Let's see if there are more people who are willing to participate." He knew very well that Dwayne Dantes was attempting to enter high society. Therefore, he had deliberately made mention of powerful aristocrats. Chapter 859. New mushrooms in the bottom cabin of the future where it was pitch black. Frank Lee lit a candle which illuminated a table covered with flesh, mushrooms, wheat, and fish. He casually pushed the items away and cleared out a space that was just enough to accommodate a piece of paper. Right on the heels of that, he spread out a piece of paper, picked up a fountain pen, and wrote with an excited expression, "My dear friend Gairman Sparrow, I'm delighted to know that you found the dry mushrooms to be pretty good. Perhaps it's more useful than I imagined it to be. When I'm free, I'll take another look at them. As I've been fully focused in both body and mind, in the experiment you mentioned, I've already stopped all other creations. Most of the mushrooms have been burned away by Nina, leaving me with the last 3. I hope it will be of help to you. Placed together with them are my latest products. One of them is a type of mushroom that grows by feeding on flesh and blood. They have 3 breeds. The first is crossbred with wheat and can be ground into a mushroom powder that can be used to make bread. Another has the characteristic of being mixed with milk, allowing milk to be drawn from them. The last has been crossbred with fish. They come with a refreshing taste and it has a thick meaty texture. The things to take note of is that they are absolutely not to be eaten raw. They need to be cooked in 90 degrees Celsius hot water for at least 5 minutes so as to kill any living characteristics. Otherwise, regardless of what it turns into, it will absorb the flesh and blood around it, including human organs. Another point. It's unable to distinguish between normal flesh and monster flesh, nor can they deal with the latter properly. They will accumulate with the corresponding toxicity and madness. I think they will experience different mutations because of the different types of monster flesh, producing different kinds of danger. However, I wasn't able to verify that, because I lack a sufficient number of monster corpses. If you were to obtain one while adventuring, please mail me one. I only need a tiny amount. As for any other problems that might exist, I'm not sure either. It's still a prototype, preventing further attempts and observation. I wish you all the best and to have a bountiful time adventuring. Sincerely, your friend, Frank Lee. After putting down the fountain pen, Frank read his reply in its entirety before folding in satisfaction. He found a gold coin and placed it over the letter. He quickly set up the messenger summoning ritual in preparation to chant the incantation. At this moment, he subconsciously surveyed his surroundings and was stunned. Then, Frank moved the nearby pile of soil out the door. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall, Audrey was hiding in her room, observing the glass bottle in her hand. In the bottle was a translucent, colorless, sticky liquid. This way, the target wouldn't notice that they were abiding by her arrangements, taking actions that didn't match their true intentions. Of course, if Audrey's arrangement directly harmed the target's life or something he subconsciously placed great importance to, then the target would produce an intense resistance, causing the hypnosis to fail. In addition, if the target had a strong soul and firm body and mind, they would be able to resist the hypnosis to a certain extent. Third, battle hypnotism. Audrey could forcefully hypnotize an enemy, making them do something abnormal, such as attacking their companions or avoid her, the hypnotist. However, such hypnosis only lasted for short periods of time. The target would quickly snap awake and sense the problem. Similarly, it was unable to harm the target's life and make the enemy commit suicide. Fourth was psychological invisibility. With one's control of the target's body of heart and mind, allowing oneself to remain in the blind spot of one's consciousness, she could achieve the effect of invisibility despite someone standing in front of her without being able to sense her. Very impressive. My only regret is that I still lack beyonder powers that can launch direct attacks. Audrey puffed her cheeks in an indiscernible manner as she tried hard to converge her spirituality and make her eyes less intoxicating. After mostly eliminating her abnormalities, she opened the door and let Susie in. With the help of her golden retriever, she began familiarizing herself with her new beyonder powers. Before long, her lady's maid, Annie, knocked on the door and entered with an invitation letter in hand. "My lady, the church will be organizing a charity party on Saturday night for a newly established bursary foundation that's targeted at the poor. They have invited you." Audrey didn't directly agree as she asked, "Did they invite my parents?" "Yes, they were also invited, as well as Lord Hibbert," Annie replied honestly. Audrey nodded and said with a smile, "Tell the church that I'll be participating. Also, figure out the exact situation with the charity foundation so that I can better decide on the amount to donate." In the evening at the Intis Renzo restaurant. This place is truly dazzling. It's much prettier than the living rooms and activity rooms of many nobles. Furs looked around as though she was here to gather material. Although she had participated in many noble-organized literature saloons, she had always visited them at their residences and not at such top-end restaurants. Zio grabbed at her coarse blonde hair. "This is the style of Intis. It's different from us. It might look pretty, but it lacks substance." "How does it lack substance?" "Look, those are all famous oil paintings and sculptures," Furs deliberately retorted. During this process, she suppressed her voice, as they hadn't entered by the main door. As she spoke, she found the private room mentioned by Walter. Furs directly used door opening and pulled Zio in. They hid inside a pantry cupboard and waited for their target of protection, Dwayne Dantes, and his guests to arrive. "How much do you think the 3% shares of Coim Company is worth?" Bored, Furs casually asked. In the morning, she had entered St. Samuel Cathedral with Zio to provide protection while feigning prayer. Zio hesitated and said, "At least several £1,000s. The bishop seemed to place a great deal of importance on the matter." "How rich! Donating thousands of pounds just like that. Why doesn't he save poor people like us?" Furs said poignantly in a joking manner. At this moment, the door to the room opened. Dwayne Dantes and Mock's family walked in and took their seats. The waiters also started rushing around. Zio and Furs didn't speak further as they eavesdropped on the chit-chat outside as they observed the surrounding situation. From time to time, their noses would twitch because of the food's fragrance. Suddenly, Zio frowned as though she had sensed something before quickly easing her brows as though nothing had happened. "What's wrong?" Furs leaned in towards her friend's ear and whispered. Zio shook her head. "Nothing. I was uptight, causing me to overreact." At that moment, Klein put down his fork and knife, glancing to the side with a normal expression. In his eyes, which had his spirit vision activated, a blonde red-eyed head had appeared out of the void. In its mouth was a thick letter. Klein faintly caught the scent of milk, wheat, and fish. The corners of his mouth twitched as he secretly reached out his left hand to grab the letter. And sitting in the other 3 seats, Mocked, Rihanna, and Hazel didn't notice anything. Klein stuffed the letter into his pocket without anyone noticing as a waiter walked out of the pantry, serving a new dish to the 4 customers. Among the dishes, 2 of them were butter-fried mushrooms. Upon seeing this scene, Klein suddenly felt disgusted. His expression turned odd as his left palm that remained in his pocket trembled. Chapter 860. Runaway horse. Thankfully, it's not a mushroom dish I ordered, or else it would have been a waste of a dish. Despite believing that he no longer affected by the trauma inflicted upon him by mushrooms, the smell that came with the letter successfully made him suffer a relapse. Klein's expression rapidly restored itself as he retracted his left hand and placed it on the cup to his side, drinking the ice water inside. "Please give me another cup." As though nothing had happened, he turned his head and instructed the waiter who was at the door. At the same time, he pressed down his clothes and slowly got up while expressing his apologies before heading for a bathroom attached to the private room. It was opposite the pantry, placed on either side of the main door. Hiding in a cupboard, Furs heard footsteps approach as the bathroom's door opened and closed. She couldn't help but lean into Zio's ear and whisper in amusement, "It's the second time. They've been here for slightly more than 30 minutes, and Dwayne Dantes has already gone to the washroom twice. The first time was clearly to pee. If it's for the same reason, it means that this gentleman's kidneys, bladder, or prostate is problematic. He's coming out. He's coming out. He's really only peeing. TSK, He seems to drink plenty of water usually and often heads to the bathroom. Sigh, it's difficult being a tycoon, but it's even more difficult being a good-looking tycoon in particular. Zio rolled her eyes. What has that got to do with you? Focus and be serious. We're on a mission. Also, that bodyguard of the Member of Parliament named Mocked seemed pretty strong. He's probably a beyonder. We need to be careful. Furs had no choice but to suppress her desire to chat as she shrank back. They're guarding the area outside without being wary of others passing through the walls. How unprofessional. All right, we'll chat when we're back. At that moment, Klein had returned to the table and sat back in his seat. He drank a mouthful of ice water, sipped on some white wine, and said to Mocked with a smile, "Having been here in Backlund for nearly 2 months, I've been busy getting used to the environment and hadn't found the time to start a new business. Every day I wake up seeing money flowing out without any coming in. Heh, it's about time I do something." He indicated his willingness to participate in the arms dealing by cracking a joke. Mocked stroked his cup and said with a warm smile, "I can empathize with that. In the beginning I was in such a stage as well. How much money do you have to spare? I can introduce you to some friends for a partnership." Klein replied in a calm tone, "I'll be able to spare a maximum of £20,000 at present." "You're richer than I imagined," Mocked said with a heartfelt sigh. Under normal circumstances, a tycoon who had a liquidity of £20,000 was definitely someone whose overall wealth was on the order of £100,000. Not giving Dwayne Dantes a chance to be humble, he casually said, "Didn't you buy 3% of the Coim Company's shares before? You can pledge it for at least £10,000. That will give you some liquidity." Klein immediately smiled and sighed. "I have already donated those shares to the church. I plan to establish a bursary foundation that's targeted at the poor." "You donated it to the church?" Mocked had yet to meet the priests or bishops of St. Samuel Cathedral today. Furthermore, he had been out and had yet to receive the invitation. Therefore, he wasn't aware of the new development. Ma'am Rihanna and Hazel, who were enjoying the delicious food, looked up as well, subconsciously casting their gazes at Dwayne Dantes. At their level, it wasn't uncommon to have friends they knew that could donate £10,000, but very few could donate that much in one go. And among these few people, there might not even be one who was willing to donate such amounts. No, there was one now. Dwayne Dantes. Yes. Klein nodded with his usual expression. "If not for the goddess's blessings, I would have long died in the chaotic southern continent. And when I was young, if I had the chance to attend school and study, perhaps my life would have been completely different. Thus, I wish to give those children who desire to change their fate some hope." "Your character is as amazing as your generosity," Rihanna lowered her cutlery and praised sincerely. Hazel also nodded indiscernibly. The way she looked at Dwayne Dantes turned significantly gentler. Seeing her parents begin an idle conversation over the charity, she excused herself and walked to the bathroom, seemingly pressing her right hand onto her abdomen. When she arrived at the door, she was just about to turn right when she suddenly turned her head and looked at the cupboard beside the pantry. She frowned slightly and revealed a look of confusion before retracting her gaze and opening the washroom's wooden door. When Hazel came out after washing her hands, she had apparently forgotten the abnormality that had happened. She touched the necklace at her chest and returned to the dining table. Dinner came to an end after the dishes and dessert were served. The four left the private room and met the two bodyguards outside with their servants. They were preparing to return home. At this moment, Hazel suddenly paused and said, "I think I dropped my ear studs inside. Sorry about that. Please wait a moment." Without waiting for Ma'am Rihanna to instruct a waitress to do the search, Hazel turned around and circled around the bend, returning to the room she had been in. Hazel lowered her hand that held her left ear and directly entered the connected pantry until she was in front of the cupboard. She then placed her hand on it. She had planned on opening the door to the cupboard at an extremely fast speed, but after some thought, she decided to be cautious by holding onto her necklace with one hand and turning her body sidewards to prevent any sudden attacks from whatever was inside. As she held her breath, Hazel took the chance when the waiter was clearing the table inside to suddenly pull the door open, exposing whatever was inside. However, apart from some spare cutlery and tablecloth, there was nothing. Hazel once again wore a look of puzzlement, as though she couldn't believe the scene before her eyes. "I clearly sensed something very valuable inside," she muttered under her breath and quickly closed the door before her maidservant chased up to her and walked out of the pantry. Outside the Intis Renzo restaurant, Furs and Zio turned their heads simultaneously and looked inside. That girl actually noticed us? Furs whispered in disbelief and amazement. If she hadn't used door opening and sneaked out from the back of the cupboard, she and Zio would have been discovered, having no choice but to admit that they were secretly protecting Dwayne Dantes. Zio wore a confounded look as well. I remember that you didn't speak or move about when she was heading to the washroom. Perhaps. She's a Beyonder as well, and has a certain type of spiritual intuition. Furs made an uncertain guess. Mr. Dwayne Dantes sure leads a difficult life. He often encounters the power struggles between tycoons and nobles while having a butler that secretly studies black magic at home. Furthermore, there are Beyonders with mysterious powers living nearby. By the way, what's her name? Hazel. Zio was looking for Dwayne Dantes's carriage, preparing to hide underneath when her gaze suddenly froze. Furs, look. That person is acting oddly. Furs traced her gaze and saw a middle-aged man in a black formal suit. He was pacing along the sides of the street, looking very anxious and frustrated. How is he acting oddly? Furs didn't have the time to observe him carefully as she directly asked. Zio answered simply, he's dressed as a decent gentleman, but his shoes are very dirty. It's as though he hasn't shined them in a while. As you know, Backlund is covered in dust. Also, he would touch the area underneath his armpit. I dare bet that there's an underarm holster hidden there. Apart from that, his expression and attitude imply that he isn't normal. They're coming out soon. I'll head to the carriage first. Watch that person and ensure that Mr. Dantes is protected. All right. As Furs found it troublesome, she also found it rather interesting. Hence, she retreated to an area that concealed her as she observed the entrance of the Intis Renzo restaurant. Nearly 30 seconds later, Dwayne Dantes and the mocked family walked out. After bidding each other farewell, they headed for their respective carriages. At this moment, a two-wheeled carriage charged out from the end of the street at an extremely fast speed, as though it would topple at any moment. The horse that pulled the carriage wore a rabid look in its eyes, as though it had been alarmed. It charged for the Intis Renzo restaurant's entrance in its panic. Of Mock's two bodyguards, one went forward in a bid to subdue the runaway horse, while the other protected the Member of Parliament and family. At this moment, the middle-aged man who had been loitering around had approached from the back and drew a revolver. With a warped expression, he aimed at Mock's head. Klein's right hand was raised indiscernibly before he retracted it without doing anything. He nimbly performed a jump, dodging the runaway horse. At the same time, Furs, who was hiding elsewhere, clenched her palm gently and pulled to the side. The assailant's leg suddenly went limp, as though he had stumbled over something, as he fell to the ground, failing to pull the trigger. In his haste, he pressed down with one hand and immediately leaped up, planning to shoot wildly without aiming. However, when he squeezed his finger, he didn't feel any tactile feedback. The revolver had already dropped by Hazel's feet. Following that, he and the runaway horse was subdued by the bodyguards. Why did you attempt to assault me? Mock held back his churning emotions as he took a step forward and asked with a deep voice. The middle-aged man immediately laughed as he shouted with a hysterical expression, "It's you. It's all because of you and the others. You talk about atmospheric pollution, wanting things like anthracite. My factory is going bankrupt, my child is dying from an illness, and my wife has committed suicide." Chapter 861. Furs's dream. Upon hearing the middle-aged man's shout and seeing his warped expression, Hazel's eyes, which were filled with rage and hatred, gradually froze before melting into a confused and lost look. It wasn't only her. Mocked and Rihanna, as well as Dwayne Dantes, fell silent. No one spoke for a moment. Even Furs, who had concealed herself, also lost the sense of excitement she originally had, no longer having that strong sense of justice. After more than 10 seconds, Mock stopped looking at his assailant and turned his head to say to his bodyguards, "One of you stay here. Watch the scene and the suspect. Wait for the police." Having said that, he paused and said to his valet, "Get a few reporters to cover this matter." After preliminarily dealing with the matter, this House of Commons Member of Parliament surveyed the area and discovered that several passers-by were attempting to gather over to check on what was happening. He then looked at Dwayne Dantes and apologized with a smile. "My apologies for putting you in such danger. I never expected the matter to develop this way. We did consider the actual situation of similar factory owners and coal suppliers, and we had provided them some assistance and interim measures." Who knew? Coming up with a bill is something, but the actual implementation is an entirely different matter. When atmospheric pollution becomes abnormally pressing and the various parties exert immense stress, it's no surprise that a cookie-cutter solution is employed. Klein sighed and said with a self-deprecating laugh, "There's no need to keep my feelings into consideration. I've been in even more dangerous situations in the past." On the surface, it appeared as though he was referring to his encounters when doing business in the southern continent's West Balam. In fact, he had recalled Megos, who was pregnant with an evil god's spawn, the terrifying meteor that had crashed down from the sky, Cynthia, who wanted to bear a child for Admiral Emirius, and the Rose School of Thought angel and numinous episcopate monster who had collapsed the mountain outside Byam. Compared to these, what had happened here was like a drizzle. He didn't even need to consider his own safety since there was Zio, Miss Magician, and Hazel. He didn't even take action besides dodging normally like any experienced adventurer would do. His focus was on whether this would result in a storm. Mocked sighed and nodded. "I can tell that you're very calm. I once doubted your experiences, but now I'm convinced. All right, Dwayne. Let's return home separately. Leave the rest to the police. If there's a need to take a statement, they will do it at your residence." Klein nodded and said to Mocked and family, "Be safe." Mocked nodded seriously and sighed once again. Backland's social season has just begun, and this happened. Cherish the peace we have now. Backland's social season is marked by the return of the House of Lords members of Parliament. It seems to have begun since last weekend. And this week, 2 cases have happened consecutively. The harm dealt to Baron Sindras, and the assault on Member of Parliament Mocked. As he thought, Klein didn't stay put. He brought Richardson, who clearly looked a little shaken, and walked towards his carriage. When he got into it, he watched the scenery fly backward as he sighed and half-closed his eyes. He was presently unable to determine if the assault hadn't involved beyonder powers, as everything that had happened could be done by ordinary people. As for the middle-aged man, he had sufficient reason to do so. This didn't need deliberate fabricating, as Klein believed that in Backland, at present, there were more than one former factory owner or employer that had lost their livelihood because of similar developments. The only thing that felt questionable was that Mocked was the target. Although the House of Commons were the supporters, advocates of the environmental measures, often making relevant speeches and are interviewed by the papers, he wasn't the most obvious target during the passing of the bill. In comparison, there was a higher chance that members of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council were picked as targets for revenge. Klein leaned on the carriage wall as he slowly opened his eyes, seeing that it was already dark and cloudy with rain already pattering down. Once again, he realized how the maelstrom hidden beneath the seemingly calm Backland surface was intensifying. Reining in his thoughts, Klein raised his left palm and tapped his pocket. In it was what he believed to be Frank Lee's reply and some unknown mushrooms. Klein really yearned to return home to head above the gray fog and use the newly received mushrooms to communicate with creeping hunger, doing so to regain the use of the sealed artifact. With the storm already brewing, he believed that there was a need for him to quickly be returned back to his optimal combat strength. And in this aspect, creeping hunger was essential. Unfortunately, he had 2 Beyonder bodyguards following him, so it was best if he didn't head above the gray fog for the time being. "I clearly don't need any protection, but I spent a few £100 to hire 2 people to restrict my actions. How helpless I am as a tycoon." Klein finally sighed inwardly as he raised the cup of black tea that had just been prepared by Richardson. He took a sip as his facial muscles tensed up before relaxing. Klein looked down and discovered that there had been twice the number of lemon slices in his black tea than usual. He glanced at Richardson in an unnoticeable manner, and he saw that his valet was in a daze, as though he was still lost in the horror of the assault. "As cowardly as usual," Klein commented inwardly as he placed the porcelain cup on the table. Late at night. 39 Buckland Street. Member of Parliament Mock's house. Hazel sat before her dressing table, looking at the grey rat sitting on a powder box. After a long silence she said, "Was my father wrong? The matter he pushed for is clearly a good thing. There is nothing that is beneficial to everyone. There will always be those who benefit and those who suffer from it. At such times, a relevant bill or plan requires thought, compensation, and aid. If your father had done them, the problem isn't his. Conversely, it also means he's cold and ruthless," the rat said perfunctorily. Hazel recalled for a few seconds and relaxed her expression. "During dinner, I sensed that there was something very valuable hidden inside the cupboard in the pantry, but when I later got an opportunity to open it, there was nothing. The rat was taken aback as it said in thought. Perhaps that was Dwayne Dantes' bodyguard. He was recently embroiled in a suicide case, and it said that it involves Baron Syndras. Hiring a bodyguard to protect him in secret is normal. The bodyguard inside the cupboard might also possess supernatural powers, carrying mystical items with them. That's why you were able to sense it. Hazel nodded gently and accepted the explanation before subconsciously muttering to herself, I wonder what kinds of supernatural powers those bodyguards have. After saying that, she swept the gray rat with a puzzled look. How do you know Dwayne Dantes was embroiled in a troublesome case? The rat squeaked. My present state is very suitable for me to eavesdrop into the conversations of others. As it spoke, it looked in the direction of 160 Buckland Street, the glint in its eyes shimmering. Based on the sleeping rotation, Furs was asleep as she felt herself float to an ancient and majestic castle. In it were all kinds of beyonder ingredients and mystical items. There were even 2 blurry tarot cards. However, she didn't take any of them away, as they were sealed by an invisible force field. Furs looked around in an attempt to find the means to remove the seal. Finally, she saw a complicated symbol drawn at the top of the dome. It was a symbol formed from fate and concealment. If I find an item engraved with this symbol, I'll be able to unseal some treasure. Furs immediately came to a realization when she snapped awake. She discovered that she had curled into a ball on the carpet in the room. She had a thin silk blanket covering her. She and Zio didn't dare sleep in the reclining chair, afraid that Dwayne Dantes, who often sat in it, would notice something different. Rubbing the edges of her brows, Furs sat up and saw Zio having her back to the wall of the master bedroom. She was seriously listening for any stirrings. As Furs walked to Zio, she said with a frown, I feel that there is some secret hidden here. I had a strange dream, dreaming of an exaggerated treasure trove and a complicated symbol. As an astrologer, she instinctively believed that there was a problem with her dream. Noticing the serious look on Furs's face, Zio suppressed her words of doubt and said after some thought, Perhaps there really is some sort of secret. I once heard a proverb regarding the mysterious world. It goes, when a beyonder element is discovered somewhere, there must be a second one. Ignoring the butler who we can't tell if he possesses beyonder powers or not, that Miss Hazel is someone with a beyonder element. Around her, or should I say, that this street likely has a second one. Furs nodded gently before laughing. However, it has nothing to do with us. We will receive our remuneration tomorrow evening and terminate this bodyguard mission. We will leave this place. The most pitiful of all is Dwayne Dantes. He's innocent and ordinary, but he ends up involved with troublesome matters and beyonder elements. Having said that, Furs looked at Zio and joked, Quickly wish him that the goddess would watch over him. I'm a believer of the god of steam and machinery. I won't be able to do so. Zio seriously considered for 2 seconds before drawing a crimson moon on her chest, piously muttering, May the goddess bless Mr. Dwayne Dantes. Furs was snapped out of her reverie as she covered her mouth and yawned. I'll head out to patrol the building. It's your turn to sleep after another 15 minutes. All right. Zio was clearly more awake than Furs. Furs immediately headed for the door and pressed on the wall with her outstretched hand, arriving at the corridor. She was just about to walk to the staircase when she sensed that there was a slight stir coming from the room of Dwayne Dantes' valet. Furz's eyes darted slightly as she cautiously headed over. She opened a tiny door in the wall and peeped in. She then saw Richardson jumping a crazy dance that had a tinge of mystery. A spirit dance? Doesn't this valet believe in the Evernight goddess? He's secretly worshipping death? Furs frowned as she watched Richardson finish his spirit dance, softly praying for death's protection to help him avoid all kinds of danger. After everything came to an end, Furs scared and shook her head. She silently said to herself, What a pitiful man, Mr. Dantes. Chapter 862. Kind warning. After returning to the room with the balcony, Furs looked at Zio, who had her back against the wall, and whispered, Guess what I saw? That male servant, Dantes' valet, is actually a believer of death. He was dancing a spirit dance and praying. Zio widened her eyes before relaxing her expression. When it comes to Mr. Dantes, that's the least of his concerns. Yeah, that valet named Richardson is clearly of Southern Continent heritage. Perhaps he was born there, so it's not surprising that he worships death. Furs replied with a smile, I know. I just find it interesting. Aren't there a little too many people with secrets around Dwayne Dantes? I won't be surprised if I were to discover one day that all the living beings in this building except him, including the housekeeper, maids, gardeners, carriage drivers, earthworms, bugs, and rats are related to mystery and beyonders. I would be able to easily accept that reality. Zio rolled her eyes. If that were the case, Mr. Dwayne Dantes definitely wouldn't be a simple person. Having beyonders and supernatural creatures around him means that he might be the spawn of an evil god or a grounded angel. Without waiting for Furs to expand the scope of the conversation, Zio asked, Didn't you say that you had a strange dream involving treasure? Why aren't you curious or considering what it symbolizes? That perhaps it might actually exist? Furs chuckled. Such a dream often implies trouble and danger. I'll consider it again if I have a chance of encountering that symbol. Although she said that, her true thoughts were, there's quite a bit of a problem with that dream. Who knows if there's a ploy behind it? I'll consult Mr. Hanged Man, Ma'am Hermit, and Mr. World at the tarot gathering next week before deciding what to do. They are experienced and powerful beyonders. Perhaps they have had similar experiences. You've matured. Zio nodded, and exerting strength in her back, she bounced off the wall and walked to the spot where Furs had been sleeping before. Mature. Furs scoffed and leaned in towards her friend. She straightened her back and looked down at her friend's hair. Without waiting for Zio to become enraged, she sighed. You're the one who matured. I still remember this time last year. You did things based on instinct, arbitrating with your fist. From time to time, you would commit mistakes without realizing it and become lost. You're much better now. Zio was stunned as she lay down and covered herself with a thin silk blanket. With her back facing Furs, she grumbled. The main reason why I got lost was because of you being a burden by my side. Furs chortled and nodded in thought. That's a characteristic of an apprentice. It has nothing to do with me. Get it? Seeing Zio on the floor, she walked to the wall adjacent to the master bedroom and seriously started being a bodyguard. As the night slowly passed, the sky gradually lit up. Klein got up to have breakfast and received visits from 2 batches of policemen and a batch of reporters. They were here for further investigations regarding Quarren's suicide case, while another was to obtain more details regarding Member of Parliament Mock's assault. With Walter's help, Dwayne Dantes met them and quickly handled the matters. In the afternoon, Mock suddenly visited and urged Klein, join me at the club for a game of tennis. He was a member of a few clubs, but there was only one club that overlapped with Dwayne Dantes, East Bala Military Veterans Mess. This is to confirm the arms deal? Klein managed to read between the lines and immediately got Richardson to get his coat, top hat, and cane. He rode on his carriage and headed to the sandy yellow unique building at Hillston Borough with the Member of Parliament. They entered the club and used the same room as before. Klein once again met the long-faced army colonel from the Ministry of Defense, Calvin. After habitually exchanging pleasantries for a few minutes, Calvin finally focused on the main topic at hand. He looked at Dwayne Dantes and said with a chuckle, I heard from Mocked that you can have £20,000 available? Although it will make me tight on funds, it's true that I can, Klein replied with a smile. Calvin nodded in satisfaction and said after some pondering, there won't be any need for £20,000 for now. The batch of firearms, explosives, and small number of cannons reserved for you is in a particular warehouse in East Balham. There's not that much, enough to equip about 3,000 to 4,000 people. Based on the price of decommissioning them, it will cost £10,000 at most. Of course you will have to give me £15,000. He didn't mince his words in any way, as though this was common in the lone military. No problem, Klein said and nodded calmly. Calvin immediately chuckled. Excellent. Mocked has a keen eye for people. A person who wants to do such business absolutely mustn't be stingy. That batch of firearms is worth at least £20,000 in West Balham. If you can find a suitable buyer and fully showcase your experience in the area, it's entirely possible to sell them for £30,000 or even more. By the way, the transportation fees and escort fees will be borne by you. We will only send 2 or 3 personnel to assist you. As expected, there will be monitors. Klein listened in silence, believing that it was time that he urged Admiral of Stars and Danitz to quickly provide him with information on West Balham. He pondered for a moment and said, roughly when will it begin? That batch of firearms will take another 2 weeks before being placed in the corresponding warehouse. When it happens after that period is up to you. You don't have to pay it in full at once. You can first pay £8,000 to £10,000 and pay the rest when everything is settled. I wonder what will be discovered. Klein raised his right hand and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion. May the goddess give Quarren peace and that the true murderer behind his death will suffer punishment. Mary responded in the same way before saying, in order to prevent you from being affected by this matter, I plan on purchasing the shares from you ahead of time. I'll add an additional £1,000 above the highest price to date. You don't have to worry about my funds. I've recently been busy borrowing money from the banks. Klein sighed and replied, I'm very grateful for your kind intentions, but any advance transferring of the shares will need to be done with the church. I've already donated it to them. I plan on using the income one received to establish a bursary foundation that targets the poor. This was the first time Mary was hearing of such news. She was momentarily stunned and speechless. After 10 seconds, she exhaled and said, Your character, generosity, and wisdom truly impresses me. As she said that, she looked at Dwayne Dantes with an additional look of admiration. Klein humbly diverted the compliment to the goddess before pausing. He then asked with a stern expression, Ma'am Mary, I have a question that I hope you can answer. When you decided to clash with Baron Sindras to protect your control over the coin company, was it purely by your own will, or a result of persuasion by others? Mary frowned and frankly replied, All the persuasion that was directed at me was to ask me to give up. Klein immediately fell silent as he didn't discuss the matter further. He casually mentioned Member of Parliament Mock's assault before sending the lady out of 160 Buckland Street. After dinner, Walter came to the half-opened room with the balcony and said to his employer on the reclining chair, Sir, the 2 bounty hunters have been dismissed. It cost a total of £300 for 3 days, excluding the food provided. They're finally gone. Klein immediately relaxed as he nodded, acknowledging his butler's reply. Following that, he eagerly entered the master bedroom, planning on taking out the mushrooms sent to him from Frank Lee, and bringing them up above the grey fog to communicate with creeping hunger. When he came to the desk with the hidden mushrooms, he saw a letter held down by an ink bottle. Klein picked it up in puzzlement and tore it open. He quickly scanned it as his expression turned odd. Dear Mr. Dantes, we are the bodyguards you hired. In the past few days, we discovered certain matters that we feel obligated to inform you. Therefore, we entered your bedroom to leave this letter while you were having dinner. Chapter 863, Charity Party. Your butler might be researching black magic. Your valet is secretly worshipping death. Someone among your neighbors has supernatural powers. The street where you live might have certain secrets that cause people to have strange dreams. You should understand some of the terms mentioned. We won't provide a further explanation. May the goddess bless you. Klein looked at the letter in his hand as he was momentarily unsure whether to laugh or cry. After a few seconds, he couldn't help but give a self-deprecating laugh. Just from the contents of this letter, I'm really quite pitiful. And the matters described don't seem to be problematic in any way. As he shook his head with a smile, Klein held a letter in one hand and suddenly shook it to the side. Scarlet flames surged and devoured the piece of paper. Regardless, Miss Zio and Miss Magician are rather kind people. The only problem is that what they mentioned are things I already know. In fact, I'm more aware of the reasons than they are. As Klein mumbled, he found the mushrooms he had hidden. There were a total of 4 breeds of mushrooms. One was 3 dried products that could react with water and fish. The second was a new breed with golden caps as they emitted the smell of flour. The third was white with specks of black spots. They were swollen and puffy, as though a liquid was flowing within them as they exuded the smell of milk. The fourth had strange gills running down its 2 sides. Their surface was filled with dense and soft scales. Klein swept his gaze at these mushrooms and took out a gold coin. He caught it after flicking it. After confirming the results, he took off the ordinary glove he previously wore. With his bare skin, he grabbed the 3 new mushrooms to test various scenarios that Frank Lee hadn't mentioned. They felt normal to the touch, and there weren't any changes to the mushrooms. Klein heaved a sigh of relief, no longer afraid that the level of danger they possessed had exceeded his capability. He was previously afraid that these mushrooms would immediately produce roots upon contact with items of flesh and blood, devouring whatever was in its path to grow before dispersing its spores. Perhaps it's the relatively strong light from the gas wall lamps, or it might be as a result of plucking them which causes these mushrooms to lose most of their living characteristics. They will be revived only under special conditions, such as being in the stomach of a living creature. With the intention to figure out the truth, he drew all the curtains to the master bedroom and extinguished all the wall lamps. Then, he picked up the new mushrooms with his bare hand and determined that there wasn't anything abnormal about them as they hadn't fed on his body. After doing this, Klein lit the wall lamps again and set up a ritual, sacrificing the mushrooms above the gray fog. Sitting in the fool's seat, he wasn't in a rush to summon creeping hunger. He first summoned a metal bottle that had his blood inside to the long bronze table. Right on the heels of that, he poured a drop of blood on the table and piled the 3 new breeds of mushrooms onto it. In just a second, the mushrooms suddenly softened at the parts where they made contact with the blood. They squirmed as they enveloped the blood. Whatever they made contact with grew a dense array of needle-like hair. The corners of Klein's lips twitched when he saw that. He directly adjusted some of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog, suppressing all the mushrooms. Then, he sent the drop of blood back into the metal bottle and closed the lid. He had roughly understood the characteristics of the mushrooms. Without wasting any time, he summoned creeping hunger from the junk pile. Holding the thin human-skinned glove, Klein placed it on the table and removed the seal around the mushrooms. Then, he saw the creeping hunger support itself with its 5 fingers before standing up with great difficulty. It began retreating rapidly like it was playing a piano. "So you do no fear?" Klein revealed a genial smile. He pressed the glove down and gifted it with some of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. Then, he grabbed a mushroom with his other hand and brought it close to creeping hunger. The human-skinned glove struggled with all its might but ultimately failed to escape his grasp as it clearly began trembling. Klein stopped moving the hand with the mushroom and chuckled. "Are you still going to randomly praise the true creator?" Creeping hunger continued struggling without giving a reply. Klein thought for a moment before he compromised. "I'll allow you to praise once a day. In the day or in the evening." Creeping hunger's struggling weakened, but it didn't stop. "TSK." Klein continued negotiating with an unperturbed expression. "Thrice a day. During breakfast, lunch, and dinner time. However, you will need to warn me ahead of time." Creeping hunger struggled twice before sprawling onto the desk, motionless. After another round of negotiations, Klein successfully reached an agreement with creeping hunger. However, eating daily was instinctual to the item. It was unable to be weakened much as a result of the negotiations. Therefore, he needed to wait for the sealing method provided by Isaac. At present, what Klein could do was bring creeping hunger around without it eating. However, he needed to come up with a meal within 24 hours. How troublesome. Thankfully, after creeping hunger fused with Mr. A and the mushroom, its living characteristic has strengthened. Otherwise, there would be no way to make any negotiations with it. Klein commented wistfully. Finally, he did a divination regarding the recent matters, and he received a conclusion that there wasn't too much danger. He also got confirmation that Quarren's suicide was a result of the influence of a beyonder. After busying himself with all of that, he left the gray fog and returned to the real world and continued waiting for Mr. Isaac's reply. On Saturday evening, Klein, who wore a formal suit, arrived at St. Samuel Cathedral with Richardson on a carriage to participate in the charity party. After passing through the main entrance, he was led by a priest to a huge adjacent hall. There was a baldachin with the sacred emblem representing the Evernight goddess placed inside. High above were a few miniature crystal chandeliers that hung down. In front of it were thin and long candles as well as overturned round metal lids used to store wax. At this moment, all of them had been lit, illuminating the hall with brightness. It had quite a holy feeling to it. Klein glanced over and saw a series of neatly arranged seats and guests, who wore out of the ordinary attire. Among them, the women mainly wore 2 types of clothing. One was dresses that were either bright or dark colors, and they were bold and liberal in their dressing, allowing one to see the fair flesh at their bosoms or their shoulders. The other type wore pure and fresh colors in relatively conservative dressing. Even their collarbones could hardly be seen. Some of them even had theirs concealed. Based on what Klein knew, this was the difference between married and unmarried women in the Lone Kingdom. As for widows and divorced, they could choose between the two. However, The former tended to choose darker colors. Aside from those, Klein also saw shimmering necklaces and exquisite earrings, as well as all kinds of valuable accessories. They were a lot more impressive than what the guests that attended the ball or banquet which Mockton himself had hosted. After walking into the hall, Klein greeted the bishops, Mocked, and others he knew and exchanged pleasantries. At this moment, there was a sound from the door as many guests turned to look back, revealing their smiles as they walked over. When Klein looked over, his gaze first lit up before it froze. At the entrance to the hall, the most attractive one, there was a girl with lustrous blonde hair that softly cascaded down her shoulders. Her beautiful eyes were green like emeralds. They appeared like the sea which hid a maelstrom within, making anyone who looked at her unable to move their gaze away. Her facial features were pretty, and she had an outstanding bearing. Her looks were nearly flawless, making the men and women present find it difficult to notice what kind of dress she was wearing or the designer of her jewelry. However, Klein had swept his gaze to the necklace at her collarbone. A lustrous and perfect pearl was being embedded within the crevice between the intersection of her collarbone. It softened the lines at her neck, making her accentuate a clean and mesmerizing feel. Klein had met her before and he knew her. She was none other than the Tarot Club's Miss Justice. Back when she used magic mirror divination, Klein had seen her before. Immediately, Klein moved his gaze away, without daring to take another look. This was an instinctive reaction of his, as he knew that Miss Justice was a beyonder of the spectator pathway. If he garnered her attention, it was very easy for her to read his true thoughts and secrets based on the changes in his expressions and body language. But his racing mind quickly forced him to turn his head back as he continued casting his gaze at Miss Justice. He discovered that him avoiding her had made it worse and more obvious. How could a gentleman who liked all kinds of women not take a few more glances when encountering such an abnormally beautiful lady? At the same time, Audrey sensed the abnormality of a particular man. His sideburns are a little white. His looks and bearing aren't bad, making him appear profound. This is likely Mr. Dwayne Dantes, who donated more than £10,000 in an attempt to establish a bursary foundation for the poor. His reaction was a little odd, as though he was trying to hide something. To Audrey, Dwayne Dantes's act of moving his gaze away was actually very normal. She had encountered many similar situations in the past. Some men would indeed subconsciously turn their heads away after seeing her, as though afraid that she would notice it, or that they would make eye contact, exposing their moment of being mesmerized. Therefore, what was odd wasn't that Dwayne Dantes had moved his gaze away. Instead, he had turned his gaze back again. In addition, Audrey felt that the greatest problem was that the gentleman's emotions were more of shock instead of amazement. What's he shocked about? What is he trying to hide? With her questions, Audrey greeted her parents and brother and the people that gathered over with a faint smile. Seeing Miss Justice no longer paying attention to him, Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief as he began thinking. I need to be careful later and play the role of Dwayne Dantes well. I mustn't let a spectator notice any problems. Regardless of whether Miss Justice noticed it or not, I've already thought of the excuse for my abnormal reaction. Miss Justice is indeed a lady from a powerful aristocratic family. I wonder what her last name is exactly. I'll ask Mocked or Bishop Electra later. Amidst his thoughts, Klein frowned slightly, having a nagging feeling that he was being watched. Following his spiritual intuition, he swept his gaze towards the door. Outside the door in the shadows, there was a golden retriever sitting there silently. Chapter 864. Actor and spectator. When the ghostly gaze of the golden retriever pierced through the curtains from the shadows, Klein's brows indiscernibly twitched as he failed to hide his alarm. He then naturally shifted his gaze away and looked towards Miss Justice and company. How terrifying! Why is that dog sitting in the corner, hiding in the shadows for no good reason? It was silently looking at everyone in the hall. Miss Justice seems to have fed a spectator potion to an animal and had once asked Mr. Hanged Man for advice. Don't tell me it's that golden retriever? 2 spectators, one out in the open, and one in the dark. Which actor can handle that? In high society, Miss Justice and the dog are unlikely to be the only spectators. Her joining the psychology alchemists was a result of other nobles as well. It seems like it was done by Duchess Negan's sister? As Klein lampooned and analyzed, he walked to Mock's family and asked in a seemingly casual manner, "The ones who just entered seem to be very noble people?" Mocked glanced Dwayne Dantes and chuckled. "East Chester Earl's family. You can directly call him Earl Hall. You should have heard of him. That's his wife, Ma'am Caitlin. That's his eldest son, Lord Hibbert. You should have already met him. Upon hearing Mock's introduction, Klein suddenly broke out into a cold sweat. This was because he had indeed met Hibbert Hall at the ball Mock had hosted. However, he had failed to notice the Lord, or he wouldn't have raised the question. I was shocked by Miss Justice's sudden appearance. Klein maintained his smile and listening stance. Mock continued, That's his daughter, Miss Audrey Hall. In the social scene over the past 2 years, she has the title of being the most stunning gem in Backland. It's very apt, isn't it? Without waiting for Dwayne Dantes' reply, he minced his words by saying, She is courted by princes, duke heirs, and many honorable excellencies and gentlemen. Mock's concealed meaning was clear. He was saying to this man, one who liked all kinds of women, not to place his sights on the lady. She was a target he had no thoughts of making contact with. As for Klein, he was having other thoughts. So Miss Justice is Earl Hall's daughter. It's no wonder she's so rich. It's no wonder she's never bargained. Earl Hall is one of the top bankers in the kingdom. He's the most influential member of Parliament of the House of Lords, and one of the hereditary peerage. His wealth is much more than Baron Syndra's. Even if Miss Justice is unable to inherit the aristocratic title and family estate, the wealth she will inherit will be at least £100,000. With her looks, birth and character, she is indeed the best choice for a marriage partner with the royal family or powerful nobles. There was a podium there with all kinds of books placed on it. Everyone, I'd like to thank you all for coming. Your character is a resplendent star in the serene night. Electra first said a few words of pleasantries before saying, Our establishment of a bursary foundation that targets the poor stems from Mr. Dwayne Dantes' suggestion. He is truly an honorable gentleman. His piousness and character are impeccable and a definite role model to others. Next, I'd like to invite Mr. Dwayne Dantes to give everyone a brief speech. Although Klein was already prepared, he drew a gasp inwardly when he heard the last sentence. This was different from usual. There were 2 or even more spectators around. It wasn't something that he could bullshit through if he wanted to. The content of his speech needed to be sufficiently realistic, without them being able to see through his lies or fake examples. Pressing down his clothes at his abdomen, he quickly stood up and walked to the podium as he buttoned his suit. Coming behind the podium and steadying himself, he surveyed the nobles, members of parliament, clergymen, and high-ranking civil servants. He said with a smile, I'm a little nervous. This is my first time being stared at by so many people of such honorable standing. I was once active in a region where the poor gathered. I was active in the chaotic southern continent and thus saw many things. There was a young lady who helped her mother make pasted matchboxes from the age of 6. If she didn't do that, they wouldn't even have the money to buy rye bread after paying rent. The rye bread they eat is filled with mill feed, and occasionally, they will bite into gravel or rocks. The hardness make it usable as a rod to attack others. When this girl gradually grew up, although she led a laborious daily life, and her family lacked any additional funds, she still looked forward to the night schools run by the church. She wished to study how to read in order to grasp knowledge. This is because she knew that only by doing so could she stop living the way she did. Only by doing so would she not starve and be able to wear clothes that could really protect her from the cold. She wouldn't need to work at factories with harsh conditions and end up dying in her 20s. Klein had selected a portion of the experiences of the poor kids he had met before, merging them together as he conveyed them with his true feelings. He could clearly see many ladies more or less reveal looks of empathy. A number of girls even had their eyes flicker, such as Audrey Hall. She really is an easily moved child. I've acted from the bottom of my heart. I've even moved myself, much less a spectator. However, most gentlemen aren't moved. Some of them seem to already be aware of the situations of the poor. Some do not mind those of the lower class. Klein swept his gaze as he continued, Our industry has been developing. Praise the lady. Klein and Electra tapped their chests 4 times in a clockwise fashion. Praise the lady. Seeing St. Anthony turn towards the other believers, Klein planned on heading over to the table to get a glass of champagne to quench his thirst. At this moment, he saw a gentleman approach him. This man had somewhat loose skin with an obvious potbelly. However, it could be seen that he was rather handsome in his youth. Even now, His blue eyes that had a smile on them and his beautiful mustache made him appear good-looking. Klein had previously learned from Mock's introduction, and knew he was the House of Lords Member of Parliament and powerful banker, Earl Hall. Of course, to him, the most important identity of this noble was that he was Miss Justice's father. And Audrey happened to be by his side. She was observing Dwayne Dantes with her bright eyes, awaiting her conversation with the gentleman later. This made Klein immediately feel a little uncomfortable. I need to present the persona that matches Dwayne Dantes. A person of ordinary birth who's working hard to get himself into high society. At this moment, he's bound to be a little nervous and restrained. Likewise, a gentleman who loves beautiful women will feel the same feelings when faced with the most stunning gem in Backlund's eyes. But he will also unknowingly showcase his own breadth of knowledge and show his charms to express his desire. Yes, an experienced tycoon who survived the chaos must be someone who has pride and confidence hidden in him. No matter what he faces, he will try his best to appear calm, respectful but not sycophantic. Klein's thoughts raced as he smiled and politely said to the approaching Earl Hall, "Honorable Earl, I happen to see the check you donated. Your kindness and generosity truly impresses me. Yet, you've never flaunted that or informed others how much you've donated." Earl Hall chuckled. "No, compared to you, the price I pay is far inferior to what you made." Between the lines, he meant that £15,000 might be a tenth of Dwayne Dantes's overall wealth or even a fifth, but £10,000 to him was just a thousandth or even lesser. Clearly, the former paid a greater price, and his willingness to do was even more pure. From my point of view, as long as the poor who yearn to use knowledge to change their fates can be helped, all donations are kind and sufficiently benevolent. From this angle, the only difference between £10,000 and £15,000 is just £5,000. Klein tried hard to express his sincerity as he deliberately glanced at the listening blonde girl without leaving a trace. He knew that an ordinary without a trace was obvious in the eyes of a spectator. Audrey wore a faint smile as she silently listened to her father's and Dwayne Dantes's conversation, as though she hadn't noticed the gentleman peek at her. This made Klein lack confidence from his failure at receiving any feedback in his performance. Earl Hall laughed and said, "Then we shall agree to disagree. This isn't anything bad. At the very least, we are praising one another. I can tell that you once had a difficult period and had once led the life of the poor." Klein nodded and said, "I do not avoid such a past. They are my valuable riches." "And this is something me and my friends lack," Earl Hall commented with a smile. "And it's because of this that you possess a unique and wise point of view. I hope there will be opportunities in the future to work with you." "That is also something I look forward to," Klein replied with a suitable level of sincerity. Earl Hall pointed to the side and said, "A couple of friends are waiting for me. I hope that your charitable ways and wealth keep increasing." Klein didn't drag on the conversation as he drew the crimson moon on his chest. "Praise the lady. Praise the lady." Earl Hall and Audrey tapped their chests in a clockwise fashion in unison. Watching them walk past him and in another direction, Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Suddenly, he tensed up as he naturally looked around the hall and noticed the shadow at the door. Silently sitting there was the golden retriever. On the carriage back to Empress Borough, Earl Hall, who looked like he was resting with his eyes closed, looked at his daughter and said, "Audrey, didn't you mention that you wish to join one of the church's charitable organizations? Are you interested in joining this bursary foundation?" Ah! Audrey had already sensed that her father might have such thoughts back in the cathedral, so she expressed the appropriate level of surprise and confusion. "It's only a small charity foundation." Audrey's brother, Hibbert Hall, argued for his sister. Earl Hall shook his head and laughed. "I've asked a few bishops. The total amount of donations tonight has already reached £100,000. Why do you think there's so much?" Hibbert frowned slightly as he said in thought, "They were bribed." At the same time, Audrey gave her own point of view. "Knowledge and the relaxing of the electoral qualifications?" Earl Hall nodded and sighed. "Nothing is an essential existence, including humans themselves as well as the nobility." He then looked at Audrey and said with a smile, "There's no need to force yourself. I can get others to join the Bursary Foundation. I just wish that you will gain more knowledge because of this and now view certain matters as definite and immutable. Heh, even if you miss this, there will be other charity organizations." "Father, I'll consider it," Audrey replied seriously. After hearing Dwayne Dantes's recount of the stories of the poor, She had already decided on joining to gather more donations, to contact the government, and organize events to contribute her efforts to the cause. She was hesitant because she felt that the middle-aged man was a little problematic. Chapter 866. Home. Upon hearing Miss Justice's greeting, the fool Klein suddenly had a strong wistful feeling. After knowing her identity, status, looks and situation, he had a deeper understanding as to why Audrey's tone had a happy and radiant air. He understood where they essentially came from, but he didn't end up envious or jealous because of that. Nor did he believe that she lacked the toughness that was brought about by misery. Instead, he felt that in this world that had chaos, warped, and madness underlying it, having such a lady exist was really nice. A smile surfaced on his face as he gently nodded as an acknowledgement of Miss Justice's greeting. After the Tarot Club members exchanged greetings, Katlia nudged her glasses and turned her body sideways. She bowed in the direction of the blurry figure that was enveloped by gray fog at the end of the long bronze table. Honorable Mr. Fool, there are 3 diary pages this time. Queen Mystic has finally come online again. Klein lampooned and said with a smile. Very good. A few seconds later, Katlia conjured the diary pages after receiving approval before seeing them leap into Mr. Fool's hands. Klein glanced at it casually when his heart skipped a beat. He realized that the diary pages provided by Queen Mystic depicted Emperor Roselle's early days. It didn't seem to contain anything important. Logically speaking, when being unable to distinguish the importance of entries, one will definitely prioritize the later diary entries. This would best restore the mystery as to why Emperor Roselle was agitated. I believe Queen Mystic is sufficiently clever. As Klein wondered to himself inwardly, he began seriously reading the first page. September 21st. Arrived at St. Millom. I've officially begun my first state visit. Faysac's weather is really a little cold. It's not even October and it looks like it's about to snow. It's no wonder it's famous for its various coats and winter wear. As well as its liquor. Fuck, the people here are ridiculously tall. As expected of a country that descended from giants. However, I have to say that I hate it when people look down on me. Tonight, I'll be going to a bar to find a Faysac beauty to share some drinks. Upon reading this, Klein suddenly suspected if Queen Mystic Bernadette's question was if she had a brother of Faysac descent. Holding back his tsking inwardly, Klein swept his gaze to the second diary entry. September 22nd. I think I blacked out. What happened last night? What happened to my Faysac beauty? I actually lost out to her in drinking. The embassy staff told me that the women here are often better at drinking than men. I should show some temperance when I head to bars in the future. I sure don't want some ugly middle-aged woman to do unspeakable things to me when I black out. The alcohol here sure is strong. My headache has lasted an entire day. Thankfully, my stomach doesn't hurt. I should sleep early. I'll be visiting the Great Twilight Hall tomorrow. September 23rd. The Great Twilight Hall is indeed grand. It's like a myth materializing into reality. That building seems to be completely prepared for giants. Since I don't share their faith, I could only circle the perimeter. The square at the bottom of the Great Twilight Hall is also filled with the fragrance of alcohol. There were plenty of people there, some kneeling, some sitting, others playing musical instruments. They exude a rather relaxed and open feeling. I got to know a Faysatian who blows a bone flute. Compared to his kinsman, he's ridiculously tall. He's roughly 3 meters tall. His name is Honegger, and he claims to be from one of the clans in Faysac that have the purest giant bloodline. The way he plays the bone flute looks very sorrowful, as though he doesn't belong here but has no idea where to go to. Compared to the skirt chasers at Intis, he's a lot more like a poet. Now that I mention it, I really can't help but give some criticism. Those guys seem to wear any sexual diseases as a badge of honor. It just messes up the entire social market. I had a chat with Honegger for a while and raised my question from before. He said that he's only homesick. But the problem lies in the fact that he's a true blue native from St. Millom. He has never left this place before. Honegger didn't immediately reply to me as he played the bone flute for a few more minutes. He later told me that he misses the origins of the giant bloodline, the giant king's court mentioned in myths. He told me that he and his clan of Faysatians often dream of tall mountains that are used as giant city walls. It's a palace forever bathed in twilight's glow, with tall towers and other kinds of buildings. It resembles the Great Twilight Hall, but it's even more fascinating, epic, and miraculous. Without anyone needing to tell them, Honegger and his clansmen believe that it's the giant king's court. Towards the end of our conversation, Honegger slowly stood up and thanked me for listening. He was going to leave Faisak to seek out the giant king's court, to find the home of his soul. He believed that in the zone at the easternmost front of the Sonia Sea, there might be a path that leads to the giant king's court. He said that a millennia has passed, but the giants have never forgotten their home. Now, it's his turn to follow the footsteps of his ancestors. This path would never stop until the destination is reached. He played the bone flute again and gradually left amidst that ethereal and sorrowful tune. Home. Home. Upon reading this, Klein felt for the first time that his feelings resonated with the emperor. Although Roselle only wrote the word that seemed to repeat without describing his feelings, Klein could understand the undulating feelings within the emperor. This was because he and Roselle were like Honegger. They had a home they belonged to spiritually. Sighing inwardly, Klein flipped to the second diary page. January 10th. Visited Sonia Island. This place is also called Ancient Elf Island. It has plenty of elvish ruins and customs left over. I was surprised on the first day. The elves actually make blood cake, and they enjoy eating animal organs and are good at using spices. They even invented chopsticks? Thinking about the elvish depictions on the murals, apart from their blue hair, their facial contours and eyes are similar to Asians on Earth. Could they be my fellow countrymen? Yes, back then, I had such suspicions as well. However, it's impossible for so many people to transmigrate at once since it's almost an entire race. I felt that I was overthinking matters. But it doesn't make sense that the customs and cutlery that appears on Earth won't appear here. Klein thought in interest as he quickly continued reading. He wanted to know if Roselle had gotten to the bottom of it. January 13th. I've been so busy searching for writings, relics, and folktales that I forgot to write my diary for a few days. Although many objects have been taken away by the various churches, I've still obtained something of value. Various legends have it that Elf King Sinayathrim created chopsticks. There are records of him using animal organs and blood to cook delicacies. There are stories of this ancient god being good at identifying and using spices. It's acknowledged that he is their founding ancestor, the first elf. Due to certain reasons, he led the race and left the western continent that only existed in legends, bringing them to the northern continent. Could it be that this is a fellow countryman of mine, a transmigrator? He later produced an entire race? There's nothing ancient gods can't do, including having children? He apparently had a wife who was also an elf. I'll need to think this through. January 16th. After further investigation, elves might really have nothing to do with transmigrators. At the very least, they didn't leave behind any Chinese, English, or other symbols. They have likely been using Elvish all the time. Nothing of it gives me a sense of familiarity. Furthermore, the inventions we have in common didn't appear before I came. Likewise for famous quotes. There are only proverbs and idioms with similar meanings but with a completely different choice of words. From all the items and legends I have now, none of them support my theory. This is a little disappointing, but it also makes me relieved. If I were to encounter another transmigrator or other transmigrators, I really have no idea how to face them. January 17th. I dreamed of the home I've nearly forgotten. Indeed, the emperor more or less gave up on that theory. Klein flipped to the next page and saw the final diary entry. April 2nd. My daughter is smart. She can speak before the age of 1. Although she has only learned a few words, I believe that her subsequent development can't be slow. Out of that, £500 was a commission he had earned from Miss Justice's glove. With no one speaking, Emlyn looked at the sun and asked after some deliberation, I need a Sequence 5's artificial vampire's beyonder characteristic. What do you wish to get in exchange? In recent times, he had learned that the Sanguine had the means to eliminate the mental corruption of a beyonder characteristic, but he needed to make sufficient contributions to make an application. Therefore, Emlyn wished to first obtain the main ingredient needed for advancement before considering the other problems. Based on his observations, such a Sequence 5 artificial vampire beyonder characteristic roughly cost £8,000 based on Mr. World's pricing. As for himself, he only had £5,400 and was still a little short. Based on Emlyn's original thoughts and habits, he needed to save up £8,000 before requesting a trade with the Sun. He wasn't a sanguine who liked to buy things on credit, even for the newest and best doll. Nor could he thicken his skin to borrow from others. All he would do is be more frugal, work harder, and save up more. However, he quickly realized something. The Sun didn't accept cash. To the residents of the City of Silver, loans cash was no different from scrap paper. Therefore, Emlyn believed that the Sun would make a request for an item, so it was better to learn of it to prepare it ahead of time. Furthermore, the Sun doesn't understand the market prices. Perhaps the thing he wants only costs £5,000. In the hopes of being pleasantly surprised, Emlyn lifted his chin slightly and looked at the Sun beside him. Derek thought seriously and said, Sun Pathways Sequence 5 Potion Formula. He originally wished to request him to repay his debt with Mr. World, but he realized that Mr. World hadn't raised any requests at all. Hence, he didn't find it appropriate to relegate it to someone else. In addition, having participated in so many tarot gatherings, Derek was no longer the newcomer who knew nothing. With the City of Silver having an exchange standard, he knew the difference between a Sequence 6 Notary Potion formula and a Sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic very well. Using the former to cover the debt of the latter would be a terrible deal. Therefore, he changed his request to the Sequence 5 Potion formula. Sequence 5 Potion Formula. That's very difficult to purchase. It will cost between £4,500 to £7,000. It will mainly depend on how urgent both parties are. Also, there's a cost to verifying its authenticity too. Emlyn was just about to answer when he heard Mr. World's hoarse voice sound, "I have it." Instantly, the palace that looked like a giant's residence fell silent. All the Tarot Club members appeared a little wooden. Is Sequence 5 that common? Emlyn felt down when he realized that he still wasn't at Sequence 5 yet. After calming down, he asked, "How much will it cost?" Considering Emlyn White's financial situation, Klein made the world chortle deeply. £5,000. Priest of Light Potion Formula. £5,000? Emlyn was first taken aback before he said without hesitation, "Deal." It was like he was facing a discount for a doll he had been longing for. "All right." The world nodded as though it wasn't a major transaction. Then, he saw Miss Justice look around and hear her say, "I'd like to commission an investigation mission." Investigation mission. The fool Klein's heart skipped a beat as the world's expression turned somewhat sluggish. "What is it?" Furs asked proactively. Her impression of Miss Justice's commissions was that they were relatively simple while paying handsomely. She definitely needed to take it. Audrey organized her words and said, "There have been 2 matters that happened in Backland recently. One is Baron Sindra's. He was suspected to have been framed. The other is Member of Parliament mocked being assaulted because of the environmental measures." Furs found Miss Justice's description especially familiar because she had been present for the 2 matters. She had witnessed them and was involved in them. She unknowingly straightened her back, waiting for Miss Justice to continue. "And in these 2 matters, there is a tycoon named Dwayne Dantes involved. He came to Backland 2 months ago, and he had donated more than £10,000 of shares to the Church of Evernight in an attempt to establish a bursary foundation that targets the poor." Audrey described using a tone as though she had never directly interacted with him and was simply suspecting something about him from the data and rumors she had received. "I wish to hire someone to investigate the actual situation with that gentleman." I know this too well. He's rather rich and he looks pretty good. He handles matters with experience and in a mature manner. He's someone with kidney or bladder problems." Furs nearly raised her hand to shout out her thoughts. If Miss Justice wasn't pleased with that, she had even more information, such as Dwayne Dantes was in a rather pitiful state. His butler studied black magic, his servant worshipped death, and one of his neighbors was a beyonder. There was a secret to his street and that he had donated the shares to extricate himself from trouble. In short, he perfectly fits the image of a foreigner who is being bullied. I nearly recommended him a medicine that treats kidney and bladder problems. After all, Mr. Moon is skilled in such matters. I can still earn a commission through this. Yes, there's no rush. Let's hear what Miss Justice has to offer. Furs curbed her heart, which was awash with excitement, as she patiently looked at the girl beside her. However, her body language and emotional upheavals had betrayed her in front of a spectator. Audrey was rather surprised and puzzled by this. She never expected Furs to know Dwayne Dantes and seemed to know quite a lot about him. This made her have a new guess as to why Dwayne Dantes was shocked when he saw her. She suspected if Furs had once said or shown something to the man. Meanwhile, Emlyn was a blank. He knew nothing about what Miss Justice had mentioned. All he could do was confirm that these happened in Backlund. As for the fool Klein, who was leaning back in his chair, leisurely looking at the members, he nearly twitched the corners of his mouth. Miss Justice's commissioning of others to investigate Dwayne Dantes had exceeded his expectations. This was because they had only met once at the charity party. They didn't seem to have any deeper interactions, so there was no need for any further investigations. Could it be that I exposed something about myself that garnered Miss Justice's interest? Or could it be that by donating £10,000, it shows how much importance Earl Hall places on this? Hence, Miss Justice decided to secretly carry out investigations because she's worried for her father? Klein's mind raced as he hurriedly thought of a solution. At this moment, Audrey deliberated for a moment and looked at Miss Magician and said, "An initial investigation for £500. If you encounter danger, causing the difficulty to rise, I'll compensate you with more." "No problem." Furs hurriedly organized her words inwardly. Just as she was about to say something, she saw the World Gairman Sparrow raise his hand. He had raised his hand. Chapter 869. Report him. Is something brewing in Backlund again? An extension of the Great Smog of Backlund? As Alger and Katlia wondered about the framing of Baron Sindras and the assault on Member of Parliament mocked, they planned on using their own respective channels to obtain more detailed information to see if they could discover anything abnormal. They weren't in a rush. They had no intention to directly ask the world what his motives or exact plans were. They felt that he wouldn't answer in detail. At best, he would just make a comment. Therefore, they planned to gather more information first to do some preliminary investigations. They would then decide on their subsequent course of action depending on the exact situation. At the same time, they suddenly realized that the public announcement of the identity of Dwayne Dantes seemed to be a boon for them. As long as they paid attention to news of the tycoon, they could roughly grasp the actions of Mr. Fool's Blessed, and from there, they could provide tacit cooperation or help. And since this was just a fake identity, it could be disposed of the moment any problems were exposed. Similarly, they could be a witness for this identity, making Dwayne Dantes appear more realistic. The simplest example was that if this tycoon had a background at sea, Katlia could provide her crew, friends, and partners the relevant information, making them believe that such a man existed. By the time the official organizations attempted to investigate Dwayne Dantes' origins, they would discover that he did exist and that those matters did happen. After a brief silence, Audrey was just about to answer Mr. World's question when she saw Mr. Moon sit up straight and look to the end of the long bronze table, taking the initiative to ask, "What is this public identity used for? Are there deeper problems present in the cases mentioned by Miss Justice?" As a citizen of Backlund, Emlyn was quite concerned about his living environment. "Why don't you investigate all these questions yourself? To not be swept into the vortex, I have already exposed myself." Klein lampooned Emlyn and made the world give a deep chuckle. "Of course. It's awaiting further investigation." His succinct answer could be translated in detail to, "The two cases definitely have deeper problems, but that's a secret. I don't plan on telling you. Likewise, don't ask about the purpose of the identity of Dwayne Dantes." Although Emlyn was quite bad at reading people, he could still understand what the world was getting at. He chuckled dryly and leaned back, pretending as though he was very pleased with the answer. When Audrey saw this, she used a second to stop the corners of her mouth from curling up. Then she said to the world, "All right, I understand. Thank you for the information." At this moment, she was further convinced that joining the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation was a good thing for her. The world first made a request before conjuring the symbol. The badge was only the size of an eyeball. On the surface, there were symbols that symbolized fate and concealment. It came from Lenivus, and it was the proof of admission to the Hermits of Fate's gathering. However, Klein had never made any attempts to participate in it before. Furs glanced at it and stammered a reply. Yes, that's it. After she answered it, she realized that Mr. World hadn't only produced the symbol, but he had also produced an item. Suddenly, she came to a realization. Dwayne Dantes had chosen Buckland Street for a reason. Just as she had the thought, she saw the World say with a hoarse voice, "That treasure is a trap. He does know." Thankfully, I was wise to seek the advice of the experienced. Furs heaved a sigh of relief as she smiled. Thank you for your reminder. Audrey asked out of curiosity, Mr. World, what does that symbol represent? Why do you call it a trap? Klein controlled the World and answered simply, it represents a bunch of thieves that called themselves Hermits of Fate. Hermits of Fate. Thieves. Alger and Katlia thought as they memorized the two names. Based on their own knowledge, they had a certain guess. The former suspected that it was an organization established by a bunch of marauders. The latter believed that an ancient family from the Fourth Epoch was involved. After some careful recalling, Emlyn White confirmed that he had never heard of such an organization, and he planned on learning more from the upper echelons of the Sanguine. As for Klein, he thought of another problem. That demigod from the Marauder pathway who was sealed deep in the sewers hasn't left Buckland Street as expected. He might be hiding at Hazel's place. Furthermore, this demigod isn't staying put. He actually tried to influence Miss Magician via a dream. This won't do. I can't give him free rein to do as he wishes. I have to eliminate this latent risk as soon as possible. I'll find my dear poet later and warn him. The grandpa inside his body wouldn't be uninterested in a demigod of the same pathway. With this in mind, Mr. Fool, who was leisurely looking at the members, curled his mouth into a smile. Audrey vaguely sensed the emotional changes of Mr. Fool as she mumbled inwardly. That bunch of thieves who call themselves Hermits of Fate are friends related to Mr. Fool? The talk about the treasure in the dream quickly came to an end. Katlia thought of something and said to the World, I'll give you the intelligence you want this week. At this moment, she was a little curious as to why he needed information on West Balam. However, she wasn't the sun or the moon who would ask the moment they didn't know something. She was more accustomed to do a search for clues first. All right. The World nodded. Klein sighed inwardly. With this secret organization, many things were indeed much simpler. Seeing that he had nothing else to say, Alger turned to look at the sun. Have you figured out the matter regarding your former chief's mausoleum? Derek said, somewhat ashamed. I just made 2 friends. As a Beyonder from the Sun pathway, he won less than 1 in 10 matches when in combat at the training field. After suffering plenty of beatings, he finally established a relationship with his former acquaintances. However, the ones he could call friends only numbered 2. Without waiting for the hanged man to answer him, he hurriedly added, However, I heard that the 6-member council wishes to open the mausoleum. Regardless, they wish to retrieve the characteristic at the very least. In the City of Silver, no one felt that such an operation was problematic. To them, being wasteful was a sin. Alger nodded gently as he changed his admonishing words he was about to say. Not bad. They don't necessarily have to be friends in order to provide you with help. When you establish a bigger network, you will naturally obtain more intel. Chapter 870. A question that strikes the heart upon gaining recognition. Derek was taken aback for 2 seconds. His shame lessened as he said, somewhat embarrassed, I will take further steps to understand this matter. I will work hard to make 2 sources of information, a friend before the next tarot gathering. Derek quickly made a target for himself. Upon seeing this, Klein made the World hoarsely say, If it involves the domain of death, you can seek my advice. And I can seek Mr. Azek's advice. He silently added. As for Frank Lee's new mushrooms, he had no plans on transferring them to Little Sun, as they were still incomplete. The fruits that were eventually produced were filled with poison and madness. Thank you, Mr. World, Derek answered gratefully. After a short exchange regarding other matters, the Tarot Club entered the learning segment until it ended. Returning to the real world, Klein immediately wanted to resolve the problem of the Marauder demigod, but the plan he conceived of was met with an obstacle at the first step. He had no idea where to find Leonard Mitchell and the grandpa inside his body. St. Samuel Cathedral? Leonard is most probably underground, but I have no way of entering. He only prays in the cathedral once or twice a week, and he doesn't do it at a fixed time. I can't be heading there thrice a day all week just to meet him, right? What kind of crappy plot is this? Is this what's called a stakeout? Even if I really did it, it might not be effective. As a red glove, he might have left Backlund. As Klein lampooned, he felt a deep sense of regret. He regretted being too focused on the sophistry and in fooling Leonard Mitchell, thus forgetting to ask for his contact method. I should have said to Leonard, I will inform Klein Moretti about his identity being exposed. If he has anything he wishes to say, I will pass it on for him. That way, I'll be able to establish a private method of contact. Klein exhaled slowly. All he could do was use his final solution. That was to ask the magic mirror. Drawing the symbols that implied concealment and mystery prying, Klein cast his gaze at the full-body mirror. He saw aqueous light ripple, producing white Loanese text. Exalted Great Master, your puny, loyal and humble terrified servant, a Rhodes, is here to answer your summoning. Before answering any questions, I want to say, I was wrong. I was wrong. Klein pricked up his brows and asked, why are you suddenly admitting to a mistake? On the mirror, the white Loanese words warped and turned into new words. In short, I was wrong. After a series of ellipses, the white words trembled into shape. Recently, there have been many people trying to find out about you, and they have learned of the reputation of your present identity. So, Dwayne Dantes' amorous preference of liking anyone beautiful has spread, so much so that even Miss Justice knows of it.